This is Lab 1, Constant Velocity. The main question that this lab asks is whether the computational model accurately predicts the motion, which is constant velocity in this case, of an object observed. This lab begins with capturing video of some object that is moving at constant velocity. In this lab, a basketball was rolled across the floor. The video is then analyzed through a program called Tracker. With the data extracted from Tracker, an observed model of the position versus time graph is created. Using some of the information found from Tracker, a computational model is created by using Newton's second law coded in Python. This model is also a graph that displays position versus time. Comparing the two models of the same graph gives us the answer to our question. After comparing the experimental data and model data by plotting them on the same graph, we can see that the differences between the two are small. This indicates that the computational model does display an accurate representation of the object's motion. This lab utilizes the fundamental principle of physics, which is Newton's second law. From this law, we are given two equations. The first equation tells us that the final velocity is equal to the initial velocity added to the product of net force and change in time divided by the mass. However, in this lab, the net force is zero, so we can conclude that the final velocity will be same as the initial velocity. The second equation tells us about the object's position. It states that the final position is equal to the initial position added to the product of the velocity and change in time. Both of these equations will be used when constructing the computational model. The data that was extracted from Tracker is shown on the right. Only the time t and x column were used in graphing the observed model. The graph of just the observed model is shown above the data points. The clip on the left illustrates how the data points were collected from the original video. The values shown on this slide are the values needed to construct the computational model. All of these values are used in the Python code. The net force is set to 0 so that we are able to deal with constant velocity. The velocity was calculated by taking the change in x position and dividing it by the change in time. This was taken from 2 points in the Tracker data that was shown in the previous slide. The time frame in the video came to be 1.3 seconds. Here we see parts of the Python code used to construct the computational model. The mass, position, velocity, and starting time are set in the first picture. The second picture is where the physics comes in. The two arrows show where the two equations from Newton's second law come into play in this lab. When the code is run, these two models are constructed. The picture on the left shows the position versus time graph, and the picture on the right shows just the ball's position. You can think of this as an illustration of the original video of the ball rolling across the floor. As stated in the beginning of the video, the differences between the two models are small, which means that the computational model displays an accurate prediction of the object's motion. The small differences could be a result of small factors such as this ball not being perfectly round, certain factors that we cannot perfectly control. If the axes on the graph were to be flipped, such that the positive x direction turns into the negative x direction, the graphs would also be flipped. The results found from the lab would remain the same, but the graph would simply look different. The lines would have a negative slope instead of a positive slope. It would look something like this. Yes, it is possible for us to say how many pushes and pulls are added together. In a simple test condition or environment such as the one used for the lab, not many forces seem to be at play. There may be forces such as friction or air resistance acting on the ball, but they are negligible in this case. We know for sure though that all the pushes and pulls counteract each other to give us a net force of 0.